I think we can begin now. Thanks everybody for joining. We are having our first webinar this academic year with Matthew Wright from Adelphi, and I will let him take it away from here.
Hello, my name is Matthew Wright. I'm the chair of the physics department at Adelphi University, and very thankful to the American Association of Physics Teachers to invite me here to give today's talk. It's helping our students adjust to a post-pandemic world. It was my first webinar, so have mercy on me. But let's just dive in. I figure we'll spend about 30 minutes going through a presentation, and then at the end of it, if there are any questions, we can address them through the chat. So yeah, right. So the pandemic was an absolutely difficult experience for just about everybody. It was a major disruption. One of the things that I like to keep in perspective is how much of a disruption it was for myself compared to my students. And so, it was the core of the pandemic was about 2 years, right? And so, as somebody who's almost 50, unfortunately, 2 years out of 50 is about 4% of my life, and it came at the end. So it was a very difficult time for me, like it was a very difficult time for everybody else. But that only amounted to about 4% of my life. But I think when we compare this to what kind of experience it was for our students who were in the formative years in their life, it actually was a much bigger issue, right? So 2 years out of a 17-year-old's life is greater than 10%. And then when you also add in the fact that those students were at a time when they are kind of learning and growing much more than I am at, say, as a faculty member, it is really substantial for our students. And so it's just a kind of a mindset that I like to get myself into when I'm thinking about how disruptive the pandemic was. There were like a ton of horror stories from the pandemic. We're actually right near New York City. So in fact, if I travel, I tell people we're from New York City. We're in Long Island. So we were close to the initial emergency that happened in the city during the pandemic, but we weren't right there. We were kind of next to it. So we did have a lot of students who were living in the city, a lot of faculty who kind of experienced that emergency firsthand, and then a large portion of our population was in Long Island, where it wasn't as bad as it was in New York City. But there were a ton of horror stories, like students losing large fractions of their family, students who were sick for a long period of time. There was the countless stories of the students who had to go to fast food restaurants and libraries and sit in the parking lot so they can access the Wi-Fi, and then doing their physics classes on their phones, which is, unbelievable that you can look at some of our long equations on their phones and actually see what's going on. There were stories of students who were stuck in households with difficult parents, and of course, the very surprising to me issue of childcare. A lot of our students had to spend a lot of their time taking care of siblings and cousins, and this took time away from their studies. When we're expecting them to be physicists and work at a very difficult level, and then they had to spend a large fraction of their time taking care of family members. And this isn't just watching a kid for a couple hours on a Friday night. This was some pretty heady stuff. Some of these students were going to their siblings' parent-teacher conference. They were at that level of care for their siblings. And so while that's good, in many ways of creating a family community, it's also takes them away from their time where they are spending studying, and we have to account for that, right? So, how were the math scores affected? Uh, there's surprisingly, for as much press as the bad math scores have gotten, there have been a number of reports that said that the math has been really bad uh, during the pandemic. There has been some reports where the math scores haven't changed, and I always think of this article written by Carl Wyman's group, uh, where they showed that the math scores actually stayed flat at Stanford during the pandemic. Um, I was listening to TikTok this weekend because that's what you got to do, and I was listening to a seventh grade teacher who was, really sad about the pandemic and how poorly the students' math skills were, and that although he was teaching seventh grade, he felt that the math scores were really, or their math capabilities were really at a fourth grade level, and that they hadn't really increased much over the last few years. And it was pretty impactful rant from the middle school teacher. I think we're seeing that across the board in college as well. And so part of this talk is to, discuss what discuss more about that. So, and not only are the students burnt out and having a hard time and struggling with their math scores, the faculty are really struggling too. Right? Faculty are burnout as well. And so this makes it an extra issue because not only are you trying to um, solve all your students' problems, you also have a plenitude of problems as well. So it's not easy. Okay, so let's take a few moments and just hover here on this slide. I want to kind of tell a story a little bit. Um, so I've gotten involved at the national council level of FizCon, which is it's or the Society of Physics Students. They're a national office of basically all the physics clubs in the country, and so one of the things that we do is we hold a meeting, a congress of about 1,000 to 1,200 undergraduate physics majors in every 3 years. And so during, so our last meeting was in 2022, um, where we met in Washington, D.C. And one of the events that we give is something that was ran by former SPS director Brad Conrad, is a workshop at the beginning of the conference where we get all the undergrads, more than 1,000 undergrads in a room, and we ask them to discuss what topics are really interesting to them. What do they want to learn more about? And we give this survey every time we run the physics conference. So it ran in 2019. That was in Providence, Rhode Island, and you can see here is a list of all of the topics that were given in the survey the students can choose from. They got to choose two. So the two most important things that were interesting to them. We then ran the survey again in 2022, like we always do. And we did add two categories, so it's not completely scientific. We added burnout and more outreach. And what was absolutely mind-blowingly surprising to me sitting in the conference was that burnout was our students were feeling so much burnt out by our classes, by the pandemic, by all of the societal strife that has happened in the last few years, and it has taken a toll on them. And that was something that Brad Conrad had independently come to the same conclusion as he was running the conference, and so we spent some time collaborating and discussing that, and that came out as a Physics Today paper where we talked about ways the community can help our students for how burnt out they were. It's interesting to note that while burnout, 40% of our students said they were burnt out, the next two things that the students identified as issues were imposter syndrome and mental health, right? And these were also the two biggest things that they saw in 2019. So our students are struggling with being physics majors, with the mental health, how difficult it is, and things like imposter syndrome. So one of the things that we had done while we were sitting at the conference, we were talking with some people, and we really were looking at that burnout, and so this kind of ended up in a literature search where I went and looked at some of the psychology education folks, and I looked for ideas from them, and they had suggest that it's really important, having left the pandemic, to reacclimate our students to studying, really address the imposter syndrome issue, helping our students build a better sense of belonging, to look and appreciate the mental health consequences, to give them parts of the hidden curriculum, and to account for the inequality in experience, right, as an equity issue. Because not everybody felt the pandemic the same. So what I'm going to do for the middle portion of this talk is I'm going to go through each of these and kind of share some thoughts on that. And then I'll come together at the end and bring together some of the other events that we're doing and how they connect. So one of the things that I want to spend time doing is reconnecting our students to studying, right? I guess one of the things that I've had to assume, which is difficult, is that not all of our students have had the same set of experiences. In 2019, I would have assumed that every student in my college class had studied for and taken the SATs. And in 2023, that's not a reality. A lot of our students haven't taken those exams and prepared for them. And and it and so I have to spend, I think, a little bit more time in class helping them get the basics down. One of the things that I do is I tell them a lot of stories about how I studied and how things worked and didn't work. Try to add some humor in there. One of my colleagues, who I respect infinitely, he is really good at connecting his practice exams to his exams. So the students know, after reviewing the practice exams, what it is they don't know, and can, come to the exam and there's no surprises. And that's also a good way of kind of helping them connect to the material. One of the things that I do is I try to get the students into the department as much as possible. I try to make space available for them to study. I give them my cell phone number, which I write right on the board, and let them know that they can text me at any time. When I first heard that faculty had given their numbers to students, I was told that students will never contact you. Well, that has not been my case, my experience. My experience has been that when I've given my cell phone out, they have got a hold of me in a multitude of different ways, and they'll text me at any hour, any day. So I just have to make sure I turn my cell phone off if I'm sleeping, or I'm interacting with my families. Um, but it has provided an extra avenue for students to reach out and chat with me, and it has helped quite a bit. One of the things that I spend some time doing in my classes is a metacognition activity. So after the first exam, usually it has to be after the exam, so the students have kind of had a positive or a negative experience based on that first exam. I'll give them a metacognition exercise to really address how they're studying. I'll go through each of these ideas, right? Reading the textbook, but reading the textbook where you're filling in the missing pieces, doing the homework problems, doing the practice exam, going through all the problems we did in class and knowing how to do them. After studying for a while, make a list of the things that you don't know, like a gap analysis, reaching out to get help when you need help, studied in a group, and then study it in a group in a more advanced way where you're kind of working solo, excuse me, but then you're connecting with members of your group to hit the things that you don't know. And so I have the students rate themselves and how they performed going into the test. I have them discuss. The whole thing takes about 15 to 20 minutes, but I think at the end of it, it helps the students to see, hey, I didn't get the grade that I wanted, but maybe if I fill this out and I approach these tasks for the next exam, maybe it'll go better. And so there's plenty of people who are doing science education research that do this and are showing that it's helpful. This isn't what I do. I'm a professor, right? I'm not a science education researcher. So I hope I said that correctly, right? So I'm just kind of taking ideas from the people who are experts and are learning this stuff. So the next thing that I'd like to talk about is imposter syndrome and improving the student's sense of belonging. Imposter syndrome is a standard thing. You look around the room, everybody looks like they belong, and you feel like you're a phony and you don't belong. Even if everybody in the classroom is saying the same thing, you feel like you don't belong, and it's adversely affecting your performance. So I guess the solution to this is to build up community and to try to help to encourage the students a sense of belonging. And so the team up report I should just pause here and say that the team up report is like the greatest report ever. I love the team up report. The report is a report on how we can increase the number of African American physicists. It's amazing. If you haven't read the team up report, you should stop what you're doing today and go and read it. It is an amazing set of advice for people who are trying to get more African Americans in physics, to get other historically minoritized students in physics, and to just basically build a very strong department where everybody's interacting and learning from one another. It's a great report. So we've had to spend some time rebuilding our physics club. The pandemic was tough for physics clubs. And so I'm on the National Council meeting, the National Council of the Society of Physics Students. We meet 3 times a year where we discuss the state of physics clubs around the country. And one of the things that we've observed is that there's been about a 25% drop in the physics club's participation kind of across the board. So it seems as a lot of the clubs have, they've had their momentum disrupted, right? It's dropped a little bit. And so one of the things that we have to do as advisors, as chairs, as faculty in the department is to kind of come in and help fill in the missing pieces and give them nudges here and there. They forgot that historical knowledge, where organizational knowledge, where they know every November they have to fill out this report, they have to apply for this grant, et cetera, et cetera. And because they haven't been connecting as well as they've had in the past, that information has been lost. And so sometimes faculty have to come in and say, hey, don't forget, you should do this, or hey, do you need any help doing this, and help them out. It doesn't have to be a lot. We did a s'mores night about a week ago. I spent $30. I didn't even fill out the paperwork to get reimbursed because it was only $30, and it was less trouble to just spend the money and forget about it. We had our whole department out for s'mores. We had a little fire in the backyard, in the back, right next to the baseball field. And they had marshmallows and just had a wonderful night. And at the end of it, everybody felt a little bit better about the department, felt a little bit more connected. So the more of those kinds of events you can do, the better off you're going to do at helping to increase our students' sense of belonging in the department. So taking time in class to connect inviting students to come to office hours, not just for help with their homework, but for broader things like professional advice. Encourage students to connect whenever possible, have a meal with students, like go to the cafeteria and sit down and chat with your students, and bring other members of our community together to interact with them. So having alumni come and have a dinner with the students can be a great way for students to connect better. And so the picture that's shown here is of actually one of our alumni who graduated and gone off to do some really amazing stuff. And she came and sat down and chatted with a number of our students during an event we had a week ago. It was pretty amazing. It helps to keep the students connected to the department. So from this one, I just, mental health consequences of COVID, half of college students basically are reporting symptoms of anxiety and depressive disorder. There's not much more to say than that. Our college students are really struggling out there. So another thing that I like to put into perspective is sick week, right? So anytime somebody gets sick, we're like, stay home, you got to get better. Like, don't get everybody else sick, right? And so when that happens for a professor, you might lose a week of classes, or or go online with some activities. But when students are sick, I think something significantly worse happens. The students missed out on those classes that they miss out completely on the week that they're sick. They miss out on everything from that entire week. And so when you think the semester is only 15 weeks long, you're missing out on 10%-ish of the semester because you're sick and you're like supposed to stay home. It causes a lot of stress. And I think we got to be very careful about how we help our students reacclimate when they're sick and get back into class. So of course, the hidden curriculum is a big thing and continues to be a big thing. Basically, the lessons that are taught just by being around and seeing what's going on, and not necessarily things that are taught in the classroom. We've missed out on a ton of these due to COVID because we're not talking with one another as much, right? We're not spending as much time in the classroom. And so I can tell the students all the things that they need to do, try to teach them what they're missing out on in the hidden curriculum. Fortunately, the students don't listen to me so much. So I have to find other ways to do that. And again, by building a community and getting the students talking to one another, I think that kind of takes care of itself. Encouraging the students to help one another, they kind of get the word out. And so I think the thing that I can do as a professor, or that I can do as a chair, is to really focus on building of the community, because that helps to get the students talking one another and letting them know about elements of the hidden curriculum. So and again, I just to mention this one last time, that there's been an inequity of inequality of experience from the pandemic. Some people have had really great experiences, and other people have had some really horrid experiences. And so while I think the average and the math scores, or the average preparedness of the students coming into my classroom has gone down a little bit, I would think that the standard deviation is the spread is much bigger, because again, there's students who are come to my physics 1 class taking calculus 3, and then there are other students who they really haven't had a college algebra experience, and they're coming to college, like just going to school right after algebra 2. And so that range of people who are coming to college and wanting to study physics is larger. And you got to think about that when you're putting together your materials and thinking about how you're going to help the students. So how do we catch those students back up? And so I spend a lot of time scaffolding assignments. So instead of giving a group project that's kind of due at the end of the semester, one of the things that I might do is have a group assignment and then have a number of milestones along the way. One of the milestones might be a project plan where they have to plan out the project. Another one might be a rough calculation of what they're trying to solve. And a third milestone might be a draft of a report. And they have to meet with me during each milestone stage and basically give me their work and show me where they're at and get feedback as they're going along. The other thing that I think can help is I have a lot of students who are interested in physics, interested in engineering, but they didn't have a strong math background as a high school student. And so it kind of creates a problem because they immediately want to come in and start taking a physics class right out of the gate. But it's not in their best interest. It's in their best interest to take the pre-calculus class and probably calculus 1 before hopping into the physics for science majors class. And so it's a little unfortunate because you really want them to already be connecting with the department early on. So one of the things I've been doing is doing like a 1 credit class, and it's just basically an independent study where we've been building microcontrollers and learning how to program them in Python. And it's pretty nice because the students come in and they get to do these little hands-on projects. They get to learn how to code, and they feel pretty good about themselves, and they have some success, and it helps to encourage them to keep going in physics. So there are a number of other things that we can do as departments, as professors, to kind of encourage our communities to grow and connect. So one thing we can do is have an industry board. This is something that we set up. We meet once a semester with a number of our companies that are regionally connected to us, and they send an executive or two to come and meet with our students. So once a year, we have them usually do like a round robin where they get to meet all of our students and have a conversation with them. And then another meeting will have a discussion where we'll kind of talk about strategic things our department is trying to do and how it connects to what they would like to see in possible candidates in the future. We can do workshops out of class. This picture was taken of David Biersack from Brookhaven National Lab. He came to Adelphi and did a microcontroller workshop for the weekend and basically taught our students how to use them. It was a weekend-long hackathon. It was a lot of fun, and it was very time intensive. It was not an easy thing to do. But our students came away really energized about possibly working at Brookhaven, doing an internship there, and also on their studies in physics. Another thing that we've done is we've taken some trips. So we did this particular picture. We did right after like we were finally just back in class. Still some classes. The students had to wear masks, so you can see some of us in there are wearing masks. And we drove up and spent the day at Rochester, at the University of Rochester, doing some lab tours and talking to them about graduate opportunities. And it was about a 6-hour trip. We did stay a night. It was a great team building exercise. It was just fun. It really helped to build the community. Another thing here is undergraduate research, which is always a great way of encouraging students' futures. It doesn't always have to be physics isolated. You can branch out and do some cool things. The student here in green is the senior student in my research lab, and he's a political science major. And he does it all, quantum mechanics. He's a brilliant kid. The student he's talking to at the research conference is a physics major in Adelphi who builds superconductors in the chemistry department. So, just getting students involved and it doesn't really matter what their level is. Just get them involved and get them working together, and exciting things will happen. The last thing that I'd like to talk to you about that we've done that really helps to build community is high school outreach. So we went to see about 11 high schools the last few years, and we took a team of our students and staff and faculty, and we would go to local high schools and we would do laps with them. So if we found that a school was struggling for resources, we might take some of our Physics 1 labs, standard physics labs, like you can see here, the air track, and bring the air track right to the school and just do the regular labs. And other times we would do special experiments, maybe with the cloud chamber, maybe bring in some diffraction glasses and do some kind of exciting, fun outreach. One of the really good things about this is that it gets our high school students, it gets our college students teaching high school students how to do physics. It really helps to improve the self-efficacy of our students when they're basically teaching the material and they're the subject matter experts. It also helps to encourage high school students to come into physics because they're seeing their peers, students who had just gone to that high school, up there teaching the classroom. And so this is an exciting way of building community that extends beyond just our little community and our physics department. So I guess the main takeaways is to be patient, connect with students, and connect with community. Right. So, and be there when the students need it. And it takes a little bit of extra elbow grease, but I think the kind of community you build will be amazing. So if you guys have any questions, you can ask them in the chat window, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. It was really amazing to hear and sad actually about all the different challenges, and I'm really appreciative of the fact your department is trying to do a lot of things to mitigate some of the damages. I think in the impacts of the pandemic, which technically is still ongoing because we never left, it turns out. One of the things that struck me when you were speaking about some of the ways you were addressing the matters was these just seem like good practices, period, no matter what's going on in the world. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about what prevents people from doing these practices prior to the pandemic? Because I mean, I understand right now there's an overwhelming amount of things happening.
Sure. Thank you for your question. That is true. During the pandemic, it was hard to go and do these things, and we really had to fight. Like when we took our trip to Rochester, we were told no a few times before we did it. And luckily, nobody got sick from it. Everybody, came away healthy. So that was good fortune. That's right. So there have been a number of, there was the report on how to have a successful undergraduate physics department that came out about 10 years ago, like what the secrets are. And I think doing those things I think a lot of the things that we're doing here would have been, elements of them would have been found in that report. And so I think the major issue for not doing it is time, right? So a lot of this takes extra time, and you have to be picky and choosy about what you have time for and what you have resources for. going on a trip right now because of inflation is extra expensive to rent a bus, and it might not be within your departmental budget. But doing something like s'mores night, I was so amazed at how inexpensive that was, and what kind of like the bang for the buck. Like the s'mores night, we were able to get so many students there. They were all laughing and talking and interacting, and it only cost me $30 to do that, and that's cheap. And so I think it's not always about how much resources you have. It's just about doing things. And another thing that I think really hurts departments is you want to do big things, right? Like we want to go to Brookhaven National Lab and visit them. We want to go to the University of Rochester, or we want to go see the eclipse. And all those things are great. They all cost a lot of money. And so sometimes just doing the simple things and really focusing on them can be a big win.
Yeah, I appreciate the simple things that are relatively inexpensive because my work is often thinking about systemic change and sustainability, and some of the stuff just isn't easily sustained unless you have an influx of money continual. And so in that line, besides sort of the things like the s'mores night thing, are there other ideas or things that you've tried that you feel have, relatively good returns, but are, low, either relatively low bandwidth or relatively low financial costs?
Okay, yeah. So the high school outreach was we found that to be pretty inexpensive. So going before the pandemic, we had a regular thing that we would do with high schools, and that cost about $7 per person. And so during the pandemic, we would actually make kits that we would send out when we weren't able to meet with the schools. And they're fun to do. And but that does add up at $7 per student. That can get kind of expensive quickly. But they're more. I find that a lot of the high schools are more just interested in the standard labs. They might not have those resources to do that. They might not have an air track, or they might not have um, like a Van der Graaf generator or something. And the college labs have all of those things. And so just taking the resources into the high schools can be a really big win. They don't have a lot of modern physics experiments. So we would take the E over M experiment. That's you get a nice circle of green electron fluorescence. And all the students love that. You bring a magnet, you can like move it around. And the high school students really like that. You're seeing like particles in action. You're seeing physics in action, and you can really talk to them about a number of different effects with that experiment. And we have like 4 or 5 E over M out of the box experiments. So it's really easy for us to just throw 1 or 2 of them in the back of our car and drive to the local high school.
And to pivot a little the conversation, I also appreciate that you brought up how the pandemic has in fact impacted faculty and staff. I'm curious how you as a chair or as a faculty member colleague have been able to be supportive of different folks who are, your peers or peer adjacent types, and also how you've sustained yourself in this time.
Yeah.
It's been rough on everyone.
Um, so I hear your question. I'm laughing because I so agree with it. It's been a tough time for everybody. You can't. For a while there, I was like, well, I can watch the news without being stressed out. But finally, now we're back to being stressed out about the news again. Yeah, I think the I think the thing that I've spent a lot of time doing as a chair is listening, when when the faculty have issues, right? And trying to figure out ways to get them money from the budget, on like the things that like on those like small things that are gonna improve community. And so um yeah, so I think at being at a small college, our research is kind of, I don't want to say it's gone down, but yeah, it's not been as, the research output hasn't been as rapid as it was pre-pandemic. It's starting to increase again. I've been spending time on that in the budget, right? So instead of spending more money on equipment and those kinds of things, I've been spending more on community, trying to get people together to kind of create that kind of starting impulse. And yeah, just really listening. People come up and, I've had faculty come up and, talk about how do they grade an exam when students are really struggling with the math and can't do what they normally would have been able to do pre-pandemic. Again, getting back to the SAT scores, where we would have assumed in 2019 that just about every student in the classroom had taken the SATs and had studied for it at some level. We can't make that assumption now. And so when we give a physics test, especially the first or the second physics test of the year, we see it. And so it's just listening to the faculty, sharing ideas, getting one person talking to another person who has a good idea. It's kind of that's been what I've been doing. Whether or not that's the most effective way, I don't know.
I think it's always really a challenge to figure out what's good in these situations. It sounds like these are pretty good practices. Have you, knowing that this is relatively new stuff, have you seen glimmers of, this is kind of working, things are positive?
Yeah, that's right. So you get some wins and you get some losses. That one credit microcontroller workshop. I remember during the pandemic, we were all wearing masks and we were only allowed to come to campus a wee little bit. And somehow, some way, I convinced the university, I convinced the student and one student to come in and work with me. And we just met and we built microcontrollers. And she was on the way to, she wasn't in the core physics classes yet. And well, we did it. We had fun. There was like 2 or 3 other students that were in there as well, who also had good outcomes. But this student, went and became part of the noise NSF high school teacher track, and got a really nice scholarship to go to graduate school, and having completed her degree. And I think back, like, that was that one credit class to help keep her focused on physics was, I'm pretty proud of that. And so there have been a lot of wins, and there have been some not so great moments as well. But we do the best we can.
That's all we can do in these moments. Are there future plans that you're hoping to try new things, things that you try that you maybe aren't going to do anymore?
Yeah, so absolutely. There are, like, I'm never doing online outreach again, ever. Like with high school students, that was not fun. We would tell them what to do, and we would show them the circuit, and we'd like bring it all close to the screen, and then on the other end, they'd all be in the classroom with their teacher, and the teacher would be running around the room trying to help them, but we couldn't help them. And the teacher may or may not have known what we were doing. And so it was, well, I don't think we're going to do that again. but I think the thing that right now I'm spending a lot of time thinking about is how do we accelerate our physics outreach? So we went to 11 schools the last 2 years, and that was great. But it is our max limit. We just don't have the resources to sustain that. And so going to one or two or three is no problem. But once you get up around 10 or above, it just becomes tricky. You have to start paying for students' time, right? One after you do more than just one. If it was just one event a year, you can kind of like say, okay, students, you just volunteer for this. But if you're doing it regularly, you got to find pay for the students, and so that's not always easy to come by. And so I think one of the things that we're really struggling with is resources on how to make a sustainable program where we're connecting with our local high schools in a way that you know has enough money that we're not always stressed out, kind of running with our heads cut off.
And just as a final question, what's sort of the core thing you hope people take away from this, if they're listening right now or they're watching in the future?
Community, build community. That's it. Whatever it takes to get your students together, working together, hanging out together, and try to make it as inclusive as possible, and to bring everybody in, and make everybody feel welcomed. So that if you do those things, the students will learn from one another. Students will learn from you. They'll get excited. But yeah, building community is the most important for me.
And I think that's a finding that we see time and again, regardless of the situation. But I imagine in these particularly trying times that community is even more important. With that said, I am concluding the webinar. Our next webinar will be on supporting student parents. And thank you so much, everyone. And I will send an email